1997 was a great time to be a kid. We were in the heyday of legendary cartoons like Rugrats, Arthur, and Dexter's Lab. The wrestling world was entering what is arguably its all-time height in popularity, with the birth of the WWF's Attitude Era and WCW's continuing war between Sting and the NWO. The schoolyard was still ablaze with WWF versus WCW talk, but there was another conversation that had entered the mix: PlayStation versus Nintendo 64. As a PlayStation kid, I was in heaven. Between Mortal Kombat Trilogy, WCW vs. the World, Crash Bandicoot, Resident Evil, Twisted Metal, and Jet Moto, I had way more to play than I knew what to do with. I was captivated by the black bottom game discs, the little green light on my console, the memory card that my brother and I had to share. It was all exciting to me in a way that Nintendo's new machine was not. The Nintendo 64 had dropped just about a year after the PlayStation in September of 1996, and at the time, there was just something about it that didn't click for me. Was it the fact that they decided to hold on to cartridges while everyone else had been switching over to compact discs? Was it the completely foreign looking controller that made me feel like I needed to be Goro to properly use the thing? I don't know. I was 7 years old, maybe that stuff mattered to me. What I do know is that I really didn't care what Nintendo was up to at all. It wasn't like I was against the house that Mario built. My first console was an NES. I just didn't have a Nintendo 64. My brother and I were never the kids who had both consoles. We got one system and we had to share it, and we went for the PlayStation. We never regretted our decision, but over time, the side conversations I'd hear in class about Mario Kart, Turok, GoldenEye, and Star Fox had started to get louder and louder. Before I knew it, I wasn't just a WCW fan in a sea of WWF kids. I was a PlayStation fan in a sea of N64 kids. As we covered in part 2 of this series, WCW vs. the World released on the PlayStation in the beginning of 1997. My brother and I loved it. My buddy Tim and I could not stop challenging each other for our custom championships. We couldn't get enough. A brand new WCW game was set to be released at the end of that very same year, and we couldn't wait.
It's WCW versus NWO World Tour. GamePro calls it one of the fall's hottest titles. Game Informer says it's the end-all, be-all of wrestling, featuring over 20 of WCW's and NWO's top wrestlers, a 4-player battle royal mode, and up to 40 moves per wrestler, including signature moves and foreign objects, all on Nintendo 64. All on Nintendo 64. All on Nintendo 64.
Not having an N64 meant that I was only able to play WCW vs. NWO World Tour when I was sleeping over at a friend's house. I knew from the commercials that the game had to be amazing, but the salt wasn't fully poured into my gaping wounds until I realized that World Tour is, for all intents and purposes, WCW vs. the World 2. The roster is still split between WCW wrestlers and Japanese stars like Hayabusa and Taka Michinoku with generic names. There are still gameplay modes like Tournament and League Wars to choose from. The tag team matches sorely missing from vs. the World have been added in and they feel great. Each wrestler has 4 different costumes to choose from. There's a 4-player battle royal mode. God damn it, this game had things we didn't even know we wanted. The biggest and best evolution from vs. the World to World Tour is the brand new grappling system. For those of you that have never played this game but love WWF No Mercy, let me tell you, this is where those mechanics came from. Weak grapples and strong grapples have forever been lauded as the way to play when it comes to wrestling games, and we are witnessing their birth in World Tour. Tapping the A button pulls your opponent into a weak grapple. We can choose one of the 8 moves at our disposal by combining any of the 4 directions on the D-pad with A or B. Weak grapple moves usually consist of scoop slams, eye gouges, a simple punch, anything like that. But if you really want to do some damage, you'll hold that A button down a little longer to pull your opponent into a strong grapple. Here, we've got more moves at our disposal. Strong grapple moves are where you'll find your tombstone pile drivers, your DDTs, and your power bombs. We've got up to 40 moves per wrestler, as the commercial stated, and that was enough back then to make our little heads spin. You've got to remember, just a few years prior on the Super Nintendo, we had like 8 maneuvers to choose from. Every wrestler had the same suplex and sunset flip as the one before them. It was a night and day difference. It wasn't just the variety of the moves that had us in awe, but the freedom to move about the ring. This might sound silly in today's world where wrestling games allow us to go backstage and fight in tons of different locations. But in 1997, it was cool to be able to stand on the ring apron. If your friend was trying to coax you into stepping through the ropes, you could grab the bastard and suplex him back into the ring. Or maybe he's trying to race back into the ring and break a count out, and you're not having it. Why not bash his face off the ring post? Are you kidding me? That is awesome. The momentum of a wrestling match isn't rocket science, but it's also not as simple as finisher, finisher, finisher. You don't see Hulk Hogan starting his matches with the leg drop. The finishing move is the cherry on top, it's the period at the end of the sentence, and WCW vs NWO World Tour makes us earn that finisher through its brand new spirit meter. Each and every match starts with both wrestlers' spirit meters in the green zone, and through successful striking attacks, grappling moves, and reversals, we charge our spirit meter into the red zone. Once the meter has reached its boiling point, that's it. Pulling off a finisher is as easy as locking your opponent into a strong grapple and flicking the joystick. God damn, that's satisfying. I want to take a quick spirit meter break for a second to say that some of the finishing moves in this game are, well, they're not accurate at all. Never once has Scott Hall sat out when performing the Outsider's Edge. Sting's finishing move sure as hell was never a powerbomb. Does flicking the stick as Hogan perform a leg drop? Hell no, idiot. Didn't you know that Hulk Hogan's finisher is actually a chokehold? Ric Flair's finisher in World Tour is actually awesome, as he pulls off his famous flop before poking the opponent in the eyes. But, I mean, it's a cool move, but it's definitely not a finisher. I just wanted to point that out. Now, back to the spirit meter. Managing the spirit meter isn't as easy as performing cool maneuvers. An inexperienced player might not realize that trying to pin your opponent over and over is actually a bad strategy, as the meter pulses as your opponent attempts to kick out. When on the defensive, getting hit with light strikes is actually increasing your spirit. Conversely, submission moves are your offensive friend, as every crank of the hold knocks your opponent's meter down another level. The spirit meter adds a layer of finesse to each match and is a metagame in and of itself. There are plenty of wrestlers to choose from at the start of the game, but several more can be unlocked through World Tour's League Challenge mode. Completing the WCW League Challenge nets us Diamond Dallas Page. The NWO Challenge unlocks Macho Man Randy Savage. The Independent Union and Dead or Alive challenges uncover Wrath and Glacier, but the real cream of the crop comes after winning a championship from every league. A brand new league is revealed, W3, the Whole World Wrestling League. This challenge is much longer, and completing the mode unlocks Muhammad Ali. I mean, in the game he's called Joe Bruiser, but come on, Dan Dance, that's the greatest if I've ever seen him. If you've ever wanted to see what a fight between one of the greatest boxers of all time and one of the most popular wrestlers of all time would look like, here's your chance.
Fight!
TKO!
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how that would go. Also, did you notice the blood in that knockout clip? That's right, Dan Dans. One well-placed shot to the dome can bust our opponent wide open, and I'll be damned if I don't always go out of my way to ensure that my opponent will need stitches. One of my favorite little features in the game comes when you are super close to getting a 3 count on your opponent, but they manage to kick out just in time. The announcer shouts, 2 count! And the crowd stomps their feet in excitement.
1, 2 count!
This is a very Japanese thing to include, as are the red and blue corners. But hey, we're still basically working with a port of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 here. One last thing I want to point out on the cool side of things is that we've got the option to decide whether we want tag team matches to be one fall to a finish or elimination style. How cool is that? The Better Games ball was still firmly in WCW's court, with In Your House still being the WWF's most recent offering. But the Nintendo 64 had wrestled the title away from the PlayStation as home of the best wrestling games. WCW Nitro and Thunder will be the focus of Part 4 of this series. But for right now, we're going to stick to the Nintendo 64 to cover what is undoubtedly the greatest game to release under the WCW banner. 1998 stands as the origin point for several of the most memorable moments in professional wrestling history. Goldberg captured the WCW World Heavyweight Championship from Hollywood Hogan live on Monday Nitro. Stone Cold Steve Austin's blood feud with Vince McMahon reached a fever pitch, and The Undertaker nearly killed Mankind in what was just the second ever Hell in a Cell match. The Monday Night Wars were hotter than ever, causing more and more fans to sit in front of their TVs, flipping back and forth between Raw and Nitro on a weekly basis. I missed out on WCW vs NWO World Tour due to being a PlayStation kid, but I made the best of it with WWF Warzone and WCW Nitro. Nitro we'll cover next time, but Warzone, it's not a bad game. It's definitely not great by any stretch of the imagination. Look, the point is, all I wanted was a new WCW game on the PlayStation with a great control scheme and expansive roster. The video game gods taunted me the following Monday by playing this commercial during an episode of Nitro.
It's WCW NWO Revenge, only on Nintendo 64. Nintendo Power says WCW NWO action is bigger than ever. Fans will eat this one up. Featuring over 60 of WCW and NWO superstars with custom finishes and trademark moves. 4-player Battle Royal mode with double teaming and more weapons than ever before.
Get addicted.
Call 1-800-WCW-8661 to order now. Also available wherever video games are sold.
Revenge is just too sweet.
Once again, the N64 kids in the neighborhood were gifted a great game on a silver platter. Was I bitter? Hell yeah, I was bitter. There was a time in my life where I argued whether WWF Warzone was better than World Tour and Revenge. But let's put our cards on the table. Revenge takes them all to school. Right off the bat, we need to talk about the intro video that plays right when you pop the cartridge in. It's a stormy night. A red and white semi-truck travels down a bumpy road, its hills peaking and valleying like the spikes on an EKG machine. A gravestone etched with the name Hogan bursts into flames, and the man called Sting materializes in a bolt of lightning. What? That truck driver's what is what we were all thinking. What the hell is going on here? This part scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, I'm serious. The rest of the video plays out showing us exactly what we can expect from this game. Proper, full representation of not just WCW, but the NWO, and even the NWO Wolfpack. We've got weapons getting thrown around, high-flying moves, multi-man matches. Goodness gracious, they've done it. They've taken the foundation laid by WCW vs. the World, improved upon it with World Tour, and now damn near perfected it with Revenge. When we get to the main menu, excuse me? Championship mode? Oh hell yeah. Here we've got every championship in WCW ready for us to challenge for and claim with any wrestler we choose. Winning the world title with a member of the NWO even changes the look of the title, as the NWO spray paint appears on the main plate. A quick glance at the character select screen shows us how big the roster has gotten. The WCW and NWO representation is at an all-time high, but don't worry, we still have generic comedy characters like Akiman and Dr. Frank to balance it out. When we fire up our first match in the arena of our choice, which, let me tell you, the options are awesome, we're in for another treat. We've got full-on ring entrances now, complete with lighting effects, pyro, and roaring crowds. La Parka even comes to the ring and starts the match with his trademark steel chair. I've got to say, from a gameplay perspective, no other WCW game comes close to feeling as good as Revenge. Each and every match feels like the real deal. One of my absolute favorite improvements Revenge has brought in over World Tour is in the finishing moves department. Remember how bland Nash's powerbomb looked in World Tour? Revenge fixed that shit right up. Now that is a jackknife powerbomb. Wrestlers with submission finishers have been accommodated as well. Sting and Bret Hart don't just have random powerbombs in their finisher slot anymore. Instead, they slam their opponent down and transition straight into their hold of choice. Perfection. A really fun example, though, is DDP. Much like Randy Orton's RKO being dubbed as Out of Nowhere. Back in the day, part of DDP's gimmick was that he can lay you out with the diamond cutter in any situation. Revenge absolutely nailed this. Front grapple, diamond cutter. Off the ropes, lift him up and diamond cutter. Stuck in the corner? No problem. Top rope, diamond cutter. It doesn't end there though. Play as Juventud Guerrera and jump off the top rope. You'll get a frog splash. But if your special meter is activated, you'll nail his patented 450 splash. There are so many different finisher situations in Revenge. Discovering them all is a blast. We still don't have any specialty matches like Steel Cage, or God forbid they bring back the Chamber of Horrors match and let us shock some poor bastard in the electric chair. But there is one super fun match type in the shape of Battle Royal. We can get crazy here if we want to, having anywhere between 4 and 40 wrestlers in one match. If you're anything like my friends and I, you played the absolute hell out of these. Getting eliminated means you come back as a random wrestler of the AI's choosing, which was half the fun. You'd have your fingers crossed for Sting or Kevin Nash, and half the time you wind up as someone you didn't want to be. These were a blast. If there's one thing that's for sure about wrestling, it's that everything is always changing. Sting went from the bright neon surfer to the black and white crow to the red and black Wolfpack. Hulk Hogan went from the red and yellow to the black and white NWO Hollywood villain. Revenge has built in a way to combat your game falling out of date with the costume change option. We can throw Sting back into surfer colors. We can make a custom black and pink outfit for Bret Hart. We can get really crazy and create a Hogan that started hanging out with Raven and listening to Nirvana instead of joining the NWO. Costume change is one of the absolute best parts of Revenge, and is a feature that future wrestling games like WWF No Mercy kept and expanded on. Revenge has retained World Tour's ability to grab weapons from the crowd, but has added everything but the damn kitchen sink to the selection. We can grab stop signs, baseball bats, pieces of broken table, which, my god, you have no idea how frustrating that was for someone like me. A gigantic mark for putting people through tables with no real ability to do so. What a tease. But for every low in Revenge, there's a high. I can't put someone through a table, but I can use Kevin Nash to powerbomb jabronis from the top rope. We may not be able to do 6-man tag team matches, but we do have the first appearance of managers leading their clients to the ring. There's no in-ring referee, but we do have this awesome cartoon ref that pops up to count the pinfalls. This cartoon ref is based on Brian Hildebrand, who performed under the name Mark Curtis. Unfortunately, he passed away at just 37 years old from cancer. Brian, you weren't a world champion, and you didn't wear face paint, but we haven't forgotten about you, buddy. There are a million small details in this game that make it feel like you're really watching the WCW product. The big boys like the Giant and Kevin Nash step over the top rope. Performing a taunt in the corner while playing as Raven, DDP, and others has them mimicking their real-life mannerisms, rather than pulling off some generic, oh yeah. Revenge really captures WCW better than any game before it, which is quite an achievement. Although games like WWF WrestleMania and WWF No Mercy came to the N64 later in its life, and amassed their own gigantic levels of popularity, none of them could touch Revenge in the sales charts. With nearly 2 million units sold, Revenge went down in history as the highest-selling wrestling game on the platform. As I stated at the beginning of this video, I didn't grow up with a Nintendo 64. I experienced these two fantastic games only at friends' houses, knowing that deep down they blew my copies of Nitro and Thunder out of the water. I was and am still a proud PlayStation gamer, but in this era, I knew I was not on the right side. That's going to wrap up the prime of the N64 era, Dan-Dans. Thank you for joining me for this, the History of WCW Video Games Part 3, The Golden Age of Grappling. Next time out, we're going to cover WCW Nitro and Thunder on the PlayStation in the History of WCW Video Games Part 4, Flagship Failures. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to the Naps of Patches Lugosi Part 1, past my bedtime.